Tonight, Israel launches an air attack into Iran and prepares for retaliatory strikes.
We will not let the world's most dangerous regime get the world's most dangerous weapons.
The targets are military and nuclear over concerns about Iran's nuclear enrichment program. Full coverage tonight from Washington and London as the Middle East takes a new and potentially devastating turn. Air tragedy in India. A passenger jet crashes seconds after takeoff. One Canadian among the dead.
There are way too many bodies, like we are not even able to count it, and they are beyond identifiable.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrienne Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us as we begin with breaking news. Israel has launched airstrikes into Iran, targeting both military and nuclear facilities, killing some of the most senior army officials and scientists. Iran says the dead include the commander of the country's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, Israel says it is mobilizing thousands of soldiers. It has told its citizens to expect retaliatory strikes. The dramatic development is not entirely surprising. Tensions have been very high in the last few days. The U.S. removed many personnel from the region ahead of talks on Iran's nuclear enrichment program that had been set for Sunday, but tonight action has preempted that talk. So let's go to Sasha Petrusik in Washington. Sasha, it's been several hours now since these strikes were launched. We're getting more hard information. Can you bring us up to speed on what has happened?
That's right, Adrienne. We're hearing from the Israeli military. A spokesperson said within the last hour that gave us some more details about how all of this happened, telling us that 100 different sites within Iran were hit, and it involved more than 200 fighter jets from Israel going in there. We're also hearing that in the past few hours, Iran has sent more than 100 drones toward Israel. So it's not quite clear exactly how that retaliation is going to happen or when or what form it will take, but we do know that Israel is expecting perhaps more than 100 ballistic missiles, which of course could also do a great deal of damage. That is what Iran has used in the past to retaliate, and it could well be hitting different parts of Israel. These attacks in Iran, these military bases, nuclear sites such as Natanz, south of Tehran, have raised concerns because of radiation that could have escaped, although we are hearing from the UN's nuclear watchdog that's been monitoring radiation that has not happened yet. Missile factories have also been hit. And notably, residential neighborhoods in Tehran where these top commanders and scientists were killed and injured. As you said, among them, the head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, which of course is very high up in the military. One person who was not killed or injured is the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, and he has issued a statement calling Israel's attack wicked and bloody and saying that there will be retaliation. As for Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel's delivered a successful opening strike, that all of this will continue for many days. This is how he put this battle.
When enemies vow to destroy you, believe them. When enemies build weapons of mass death, stop them. As the Bible teaches us, when someone comes to kill you, rise and act first. This is exactly what Israel has done today. We have risen like lions to defend ourselves.
So Israel has declared a state of emergency, told people to stay in or near air raid shelters, and to expect more of that Iranian retaliation, perhaps in the coming hours. Adrienne?
All right, Sasha, thank you. That is Sasha Petrusik in Washington. So Chris Reyes also joins us now from New York. So Chris, so interesting to determine where the Trump administration is on all of this, what it's saying, what it is not saying.
Yeah, still nothing directly from President Trump at this hour, but Fox News host Bret Baier, someone that Trump talks to pretty frequently, Adrienne, went on air to say that he spoke to the president after these strikes, and three things. He said that the president was aware of Israel's action before it happened, that he's hoping to get back to the negotiating table with Iran, and then perhaps the most notable, Trump apparently told him that the U.S. will defend itself and Israel if Iran retaliates. Now, that said, the first official communication from the Trump administration following this strike was from State Secretary Marco Rubio. He posted a statement shortly after the strikes happened, and he made a point to underscore that the U.S. is not involved in the strikes, that this was a unilateral move by Israel. Now, some Israeli media, including its public broadcaster, are reporting that Israeli officials are saying that they fully coordinated with the U.S. on this attack. What fully coordinated means, I mean, we don't know at this point. Last we heard directly from President Trump was at a bill signing ceremony, and that was midday yesterday. And Trump seemed to know enough even back then to pull Americans back from the region. This is what he said about that.
There's a chance of massive conflict. We have a lot of American people in this area, and I said, we got to tell them to get out because something could happen soon. And I don't want to be the one that didn't give any warning and missiles are flying into their buildings. It's possible. So I had to do it.
Yeah, so was that a fail-safe strategy, or did he know something officially from Israel? There was some reporting before all of this transpired that an attack would only happen if the talks scheduled for Sunday with U.S. and Iranian officials in Oman, if that fell through. And then, Adrienne, maybe in a last-ditch attempt to salvage that meeting, Trump posted on Truth Social yesterday afternoon that he was committed to diplomacy and negotiations with Iran. What's what at this point? We'll only really learn more once we hear directly from President Trump.
All right. Well, it will happen. Chris Reyes in New York. Thank you, Chris. Now, senior international correspondent Margaret Evans has reported extensively from the region, and she was just in Iran a few weeks ago. I spoke with her earlier about the new heightened danger.
I'd say that most analysts in the region will be looking to see whether retaliation is directed solely at Israel, or whether they also include U.S. targets, forces in the region, in Iraq and the Gulf states, things like that. An enormous amount of posturing up to this point between Iran and the United States ahead of, these ongoing nuclear talks. There are more talks about talks to achieve a nuclear agreement. When we were in Iran, we spoke to a senior advisor to the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who said that, Iran had very specific red lines that it wasn't willing to budge on. It insists that it doesn't aspire to a nuclear weapon, that what it's trying to do is have a domestic nuclear program. But despite, those comments about a red line, it was very clear to us that, Iran's officialdom needed some kind of an agreement. The economy is in disarray. There are a lot of tensions within the country between would-be reformers and the hardliners, so a lot of domestic pressure. And of course, we've heard from Washington that the U.S. President Donald Trump really wanted a deal as well. So we'll have to wait and see. From ordinary people in Iran, I've had a message from someone I know in Tehran tonight saying they were woken up by the sound of the explosions. People will be shocked because although there are a lot of people who still say down with the United States, a lot of the people we spoke to, especially young Iranians, were really desperate for some kind of agreement that would see Iran emerge from decades of isolation.
All right, Margaret Evans in London tonight. To help us with the context of all of this, we spoke earlier with Janice Stein, the founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and we began by talking about word from Iran's state broadcaster that the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has been killed. My question for her, how critical is that?
For the Iranians, it's a humiliation, and it virtually, there's no doubt that a retaliation will be coming. There's no doubt.
So when we hear the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei say several commanders and several scientists were killed. State TV also saying that civilians, including some children, were killed when residential areas were hit. You hear that. And where does your mind go in terms of possible retaliation and when that might happen?
I mean, the fact that a high-profile commander was killed, I think, is the most important part of that. But also, there are reports coming out, actually by the IAEA, that Natanz was struck and that they are monitoring radiation levels, because Natanz is one of the two most important areas where the centrifuges that enrich are located. The other one, there's actually no confirmed reports yet, Adrienne, and that's interesting, which is Fardo. And why is Fardo so important? Because Fardo is the area where the centrifuges are buried half a kilometer down. And that's been the argument against an attack, that it will be extremely difficult. You would need bunker-busting bombs to go that deeply underground. There are no reports out yet that there was a strike against Fardo. So we'll have to wait and get more information. But and there were some attacks on the outskirts of Isfahan, where radars are concentrated that protect a third area. We'll have to wait for more detailed confirmation. But if there was significant damage inflicted on the enrichment centers, that will only escalate the retaliation, because if you're the Iranian military thinking about this, you are not going to leave a lot behind because you're expecting another wave of attacks, frankly.
Well, I mean, to that point, I think it's pretty clear that Israel has indicated this is not a one and done,
That's right.
that it has more to do. Which would that suggest to you that retaliation would come imminently? Because we're looking at Israel in a state of emergency right now. The sirens are going off. People are told to stay close to the shelters. Are you anticipating that Iran won't wait, if you will?
I don't think Iran is going to wait too long. It's very interesting because the two prior Iranian attacks, in the two prior cases, Iran went first. They were usually about 4 in the morning when it was still dark. You remember those pictures of the lit up sky. It's now light. And so it's probably easier to identify on the ground, although there's very advanced sensors, but daylight always helps. You can identify the launch. So the temptation for Iran would be to wait it out until it gets dark again. And given the state of emergency that's been declared in Israel, the population is not going to be free, frankly, to leave the shelters. So it's actually the longer the wait for the Iranian retaliation, the greater the psychological damage and the economic damage. If schools are closed in Israel, the population is largely in shelters. There's no loss to Iran for waiting, except if they think that another attack from Israel is imminent, and then they'll want to go even in daylight. But we're not talking long here, Adrienne. We're not talking days. We're talking hours.
Okay. Could we just talk briefly about the essence of the accusation here, right? So Israel says that Iran is close to making, I guess, 15 nuclear weapons, very close to making it, and that this was coming very soon. Is it your sense that that's true? And is that why we're talking about this happening right now?
That's actually been confirmed. I mean, that was part of what, there were three factors that fueled this escalation event. One was the report by the Nuclear Commission in which they condemned Iran for violating their obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act, and also under an agreement which, as we know, Trump was the first to violate, right? Secondly, there's not a great deal of disagreement from anyone other than Iran, that Iran has now enriched to a level of 60%. It's literally, you know, you can enrich to the level of 90% once you're 60 because you've broken through all the technological barriers. The know-how is there. So it can be a matter of weeks. And thirdly, there's agreement. The range, the difference is very narrow. The reports are 10 nuclear weapons. Now, they haven't built a nuclear weapon yet. So I think to say they're days away is not accurate. They have enough enriched uranium to build 10 or 15 nuclear weapons. The difference is not material, but they haven't done it. And assembling those weapons and matching them to a delivery system, I think that's a matter of months rather than days.
Janice, I only have about 20 seconds left here. I just want to ask you briefly about Donald Trump, about the Americans right now. Where are they in this? Because they evacuated their personnel. They had some intel, something was about to happen. What are they going to do?
Oh, they knew. All right, you don't evacuate like that. You don't evacuate dependents. They knew. Given this president, Adrienne, I don't think he's going to be very pleased with someone accelerating his schedule, disrupting his plan for negotiation, and forcing him to get involved.
Okay.
I think it's going to be very different from the prior two times.
Okay, lots to watch for, unfortunately. Janice Stein, thank you. Thank you for being with us all night. Appreciate it. If you're just joining us, we are following developments in a major breaking news story. Israel has launched an attack on Iran, targeting dozens of military and nuclear facilities. The UN nuclear watchdog has confirmed that at least one nuclear enrichment facility was hit. And Israel says it is preparing for retaliatory strikes. Things are changing rapidly. We are staying on it. We're back in 2. In India and here at home, there's profound grief after news that all but one person on the Air India plane that crashed today died. A Canadian dentist is believed to be among them. The plane slammed into a medical college, erupting in a ball of flames. The wreckage looks unsurvivable. But stunningly, one person did walk away, a British man who is now the lone survivor of this crash. It happened in the northwestern city of Ahmedabad. The plane had just taken off when it suddenly stopped climbing, started sinking, and crashed just barely off the runway. Our South Asia correspondent, Salima Shivji, is in Ahmedabad. So, Salima, you're at the hospital there, pretty close to the crash site. Can you give us a sense of what's happening around you?
Well, Adrienne, all night, family members and friends of the victims of this crash have gathered, waiting for official confirmation that the bodies of their loved ones have been identified, a painful process as they start to grieve. Mere minutes after takeoff, a mayday call as the Boeing plane bound for London started careening down over buildings. And then tragedy. The crash site in a heavily populated area close to Ahmedabad's airport, a disaster zone. With smoldering debris and parts of the plane strewn everywhere. The search for survivors frantic as the high death toll became increasingly clear. Of the 242 people on board, Indians, British, Portuguese nationals, and one Canadian, all of them killed, says Air India. Except one man, British citizen Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, who miraculously managed to walk away from the wreckage. There were bodies all around me, he told local media. I was scared. I ran. He's now in hospital, out of danger. But for those who lost loved ones, pure anguish. Kalpesh Putney's younger brother, only 15 years old, was burned to death by the plane's door that flew from the wreckage into his home. Their mother, trying to save her boy, has burns all over her body. Outside this hospital's post-mortem ward, relatives hover waiting for confirmation their loved ones have been identified. with doctors working overtime.
There are way too many bodies, like we are not even able to count it, and they are beyond identifiable. They are completely burned, and the only way they are identified is by using their teeth. They're like, it's horrible. That's the only way I can describe. There are no other words to describe what's going on there.
One of the victims, Canadian Nirali Suresh Kumar Patel, a dentist from Mississauga, Ontario. Her husband scrambling to make it here with their 1-year-old to retrieve her remains. The recovery effort going deep into the night is complicated. The crash left a path of destruction, destabilizing buildings and killing dozens in the plane's path. The medical college the plane landed on while students were having lunch is now a charred shell. At least 5 of the students are among the dead. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will likely be here tomorrow to offer condolences at the site of the worst airplane crash that India has seen in decades.
Salima, rescuers are still in the recovery phase, but what's the status of the investigation?
Well, Adrienne, it has begun, and it will be led by India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau. Boeing will also send a team, it says, to help India with the investigation to do whatever is necessary. But getting answers here will take time, and the main priority is still recovery of bodies under the debris, and that is tricky with so many buildings here unstable.
Indeed. Thank you, Salima. Salima Shivji in Ahmedabad tonight. And in the United States tonight, we are following a physical altercation involving a Democratic senator. That story in just minutes. Stay with us.
This operation will continue for as many days as it takes.
We're following breaking news. Israel has launched airstrikes into Iran, targeting, it says, Iranian nuclear and military sites. What you're looking at is some of the damage, according to Iranian state television. It says the commander of the country's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has been killed. Now, here in North America, things are also moving very fast. This time in California, a U.S. judge said the Trump administration must return California's National Guard to state control. But then late tonight, an appeals court put that ruling on hold. As Paul Hunter shows us, it is more fuel for an already tense political climate that today got physical.
For Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, the intent was to update on those immigration raids in California and on the loud protests against both the raids and the use of federal forces to protect those doing the raids. Noem was blunt.
We are not going away. We are staying here to liberate this city.
But suddenly, a man tried to interrupt Noem with a question. He was grabbed almost immediately.
Also, I want to talk specifically.
I'm a U.S. Senator, he said, though he didn't appear to show any ID. Indeed, Democratic Senator Alex Padilla was then pushed into this hallway, forced to the ground, and handcuffed.
If this is how this administration responds to a senator with a question, if this is how the Department of Homeland Security responds to a senator with a question, you can only imagine what they're doing to farm workers, to cooks, to day laborers out in the Los Angeles community.
Noem said later her security was unaware who he was as they detained him. In Washington, Democratic lawmakers marched in fury over it to the Republican-controlled Senate, shouting at the Republican Speaker of the House.
Why don't you stand up for Congress?
All of it viscerally underlining the fast-growing tensions and fears in California and beyond. Even as that drama played out in Washington, this just south of downtown L.A.
ICE is in Compton, y'all.
Video showing immigration officers in an apparent raid at a local shipping warehouse. Unclear if any immigrants inside were detained. The father of Fanny and Ricardo Fernandez had texted them to say he was in there somewhere, hiding inside a truck even after the raid ended.
What is the feeling in the community around here right now?
I mean, I think it's just fear that like anybody can be like picked off for like no reason, no due process, right? That's my fear. I mean, I think it's just a lot of hate.
Soon enough, their father called he was safe for now. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Los Angeles.
Now let's dig deeper into the stories shaping our world. It's Thursday, so Rosie's here with that issue.
At issue tonight, the G7 summit. World leaders coming to Alberta to discuss big global issues.
Canada is hosting global leaders for a global conversation about numerous issues: energy security, peace and stability.
But there are concerns, even within the Liberal caucus, about some of the invitations to non-G7 leaders.
India has to be accountable. They have to give assurance that they are going to cooperate.
So what's been made of some of the expanded list of invites to this meeting? What can we expect to come out of the G7 this week? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj. Let's start with the invite list, and then we'll get to whether we should expect anything substantive and remarkable. It has been expanded not only to, I think most controversially, invite Narendra Modi, but there was an invite to Saudi Arabia, and the list of people is longer than you might expect for a G7. Not for the G7, but for the second day, where other nations will take to the table. What did you make of what's behind this, Andrew, and why the Prime Minister has taken this approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a G20 minus Russia and China, you know. I think they're sort of designing the plane while they're flying it. They're having to, I think they're wrestling with a lot of issues that have been set in train by the calamity in Washington, if I can call it that, of Donald Trump. While Donald Trump is actually at the conference. It's going to be fascinating to see them try to square that circle. I think it accounts for the fact that they're not going to be issuing a communique at the end. But they're trying to deal with, for example, Ukraine and the very changed security situation. Well, the situation has changed because the United States is basically taking Russia's side. So I think perhaps part of the calculation was there was safety in numbers. If you bring in more players, you can make it more of a kind of a global, if you will, of the democracies rather than just the G7. But they're taking on a lot of things at the same time, but because a lot of things are happening at the same time.
Yeah, but I mean, those invites didn't have to go out, Althea. This is obviously the Prime Minister's made this decision in terms of what he sees is happening in the world and what his goals are. So tell me your thoughts.
I think, one, it's how Mark Carney wants to present himself to Canadians and to the world. Two, it's a focus on trading relationships. Three, it's a recognition that the global geopolitical situation has changed, that our so-called enemies have banded together, and that we need to do a better job of integrating our friendlies in a way of not just being a kind of elitist club. So I think that there's a lot of there's probably more considerations than that, sure. But that have influenced some of the invite list. I'm told the Saudi Arabia invite, which I thought was deeply shocking, that MBS had been invited, but apparently he's not coming, has more to do with Palestine and the situation in Gaza and recognition of Palestine territory than it has anything to do with business trade. I put that out there. That's what I've been told. I think the fact that we're bringing the Mexico president here is a good sign to reset the relationship, which seems to be frosty, especially since Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, has suggested we should freeze out Mexico from a renewed CUSMA deal or negotiate a side agreement. So I think there's a whole bunch of different agendas at play at this Sunday, Monday, Tuesday meeting.
The Prime Minister did tell Patrice Roy yesterday that the UAE and Saudi Arabia, that was also about artificial intelligence and tapping into capital there, for what it's worth. Chantal, what do you make of the invite list?
It's not the first time, and not just the Canadian thing, that the G7 list is extended. We always knew President Zelensky, for instance, was going to show up. He was invited from the first. And once Donald Trump said he would be there, he's a major draw. It's easy to invite people. They're basically coming not to sign off on communiques, but to talk to Donald Trump one-on-one if they can grab his attention long enough. If you go back to the beginning, the notion of the G7 in this current environment, the elements of that meeting, add Zelensky to that, was maybe the elements of a 6 versus 1 dynamic, i.e. all the others versus Donald Trump, plus Zelensky. And up to a point, you kind of take away from that possibility by drowning the place with issues and meetings. It is also, I believe, useful for people who run countries to talk to each other one-on-one. Things that you will not see in the communique do get accomplished over that. But I think by doing that, Mark Carney has saved himself the scenario of everyone ganging up on Donald Trump with the expected results.
Yeah.
As for trade, well, we'll see. I'm not so sure that we're going to get a lot of practical results from these meetings.
We'll talk later about whether anything could happen there between Canada and the U.S. But you mentioned it too, Andrew. There's no final communique that was told by a senior Canadian official today. There are going to be short statements of agreement, potentially. Does that kind of thing matter, or does it just matter that they're all there talking about things?
I think it reflects reality. You know, there isn't a G7 as such anymore. When the biggest player, as big as all the rest of them, is basically on the other side of a number of fundamental issues, then you're kind of going through the motions in a way by continuing to meet as a G7. So I think the only answer to that was to enlarge it, to give more free play for some of these negotiations and discussions on the sidelines, to not try to pretend there's a unity when there isn't unity, but to try at the same time to get some of these the other non-U.S. actors, to give them a chance to work together and to pretend the U.S. is sort of both there and not there at the same time. I cannot imagine how weird it is for anybody in these negotiations to be having to pretend the United States is still on board when it manifestly isn't, and yet that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, it'll be even stranger than like the Trump 1.0, I would think, Althea, in terms of how much further he's gone in some of his positions.
The thing is, all the negotiations for what would be in a communique have basically already happened. Sure. So they know what the points of tensions are. And in a way, this is lowering expectations so that we don't expect that there is unanimity on a final statement. And if by a miracle there is no drama and actually they get agreement, everybody will say what a great success this was. So that's part of it. The other thing is they probably didn't think that they could get agreement. But I think I want to mention on the earlier point, because I think it reflects the way this government is running things. You know, this Modi backlash that is happening within the Liberal caucus, if they had discussed this issue ahead of time with the caucus, they would have been able to mitigate so much of the backlash that has happened. The same thing with C5, the Natural Resources Bill. If they had talked to caucus about it before and not briefed them an hour before they tabled it, some of the backlash would not have happened. Or the stakeholders on the border bill. They don't seem to value caucus as a sounding board, and I think this is going to cause more and more problems if they don't realize it soon.
Well, yeah, well, we've seen that certainly with past prime ministers. Chantal, last word to you on this.
Well, on the Modi invite, you can understand why Liberal caucus members would be jarred. It's not even a year since Justin Trudeau stood up in the House of Commons to say there was evidence that the Modi government had partaken in the assassination of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. So it seems for many caucus members that this is a prime minister who is getting rid of red lines from his predecessors. But this was one that really stuck because it was totally unexpected. Althea is right. And not seeing it coming kind of makes it worse because you do need the explanations, and they came after the.
Yeah. Okay, let's leave that part of the conversation there. Thank you all. When we come back, we'll take a look at Canada's new commitment to defense spending.
Probably one of the most important investments in national defense in the last 75 years.
So what does this mean, these promises, these big commitments mean for the country, for the military, for Canada's position on the global stage? That's next. At issue, increased defense spending. The Prime Minister says Canada will hit its NATO targets ahead of schedule.
Canada will achieve NATO's 2% of GDP target this year, half a decade ahead of schedule.
And will stand strong with European allies.
In parallel, we are actively seeking to strengthen transatlantic security, particularly by becoming a participant in Rearm Europe.
So here to break down what this new commitment means for our international partners and for the military, Chantal Hébert and Andrew Althea Raj. Chantal, let's start with you. This is a big amount of money, $9 billion, just over $9 billion, in a very tight timeline, and something that the world had been asking of us for some time, just as potential new targets are on the horizon. What does that tell you about the government's approach to the world? I guess Mark Carney's foreign policy approach, too. It's kind of the same conversation almost.
Okay, so I'm going to bring it down to a bargaining chip, looking ahead to the G7 and the meeting with Donald Trump. 1. 2, a move that was not forecast in the election campaign and not part of the election platform that was put forward by the Liberals. And 3, a move that kind of makes the production of a budget a more compelling exercise than maybe it even was a week ago. Because I'm sure many people, including the opposition parties, would really like to know what the trade-offs for Canadians are going to be to pay for this. And finally, it's one thing to say that you're doing this, and some of this is the easy part. You raise wages, etc. But we have not been good at spending money and executing spending on the defense side. I'm being polite here. So where or how do we assume that we will be better at it by March 31st of 2026?
Yeah, some new agency, I think, would be the government's answer. But how it works, I don't know either. I don't know either. And I would also say, Andrew, part of what the Prime Minister said about what Chantal said about where this money comes from, he talked about Canadians making sacrifices without saying anything more about what that means either. So anyway, your thoughts. Except
that he ruled out increased taxes. So
That's right.
It's going to be either cutting spending in some area or more likely larger deficits, which he doesn't seem to show much aversion to. Look, it's progress that we're meeting the 2% target that we first agreed to informally in 2006 and formally in 2014. It's a good thing he did it before the NATO meeting later this month, because I'm not sure they'd let him in the door if he hadn't. And the target now, it looks like it's going to shift to 3.5% or 5%, depending how you define it. So we've got a lot of tough sledding ahead of time. I think he was right to focus in the short term on operational things like, as Chantal said, more recruitment, higher pay, things you can do just by basically writing checks. You can do that quickly, and it's also really necessary. The part of our problem is not just lack of capacity, it's that the capacity we have now is not functional. You know, that we've got machinery that's broken down and we can't afford to fix it, et cetera. So good in the short term to focus on upgrading our existing capacity. Longer term, we do have to figure out our broken procurement process if we're going to make capital acquisitions. And so it's a little distressing to see him emphasizing a made in Canada strategy where they're even going to have to use Canadian steel and Canadian aluminum. If we're going to meet our targets in a functional way, and not just in terms of quickness, but also performance and adding the most bang for the buck, we should be buying the cheapest equipment wherever we can find it that can produce the machinery and the firepower that we need. And if that means buying it off the shelf from some other country, so be it. Part of the reason we're in the fix we're in defense is we've used it over the decades as a regional development or a pork barrel or an industrial strategy or a handout to the defense industry, whatever you want to call it. But we've had everything except military readiness as our first priority.
Yeah, except it's clear from what he said that he also is looking for ways to not spend most of the money in the United States.
In the United States, I understand that.
He's trying to do those two things at once, I guess.
Yeah, I understand not being dependent on the United States, but we could be buying it from Italy, France, Sweden, you know.
Fair enough. Yeah, okay. Althea.
So I agree with everything Andrew and Chantal have just said. I think the reason, plain and simple, that it wasn't in the election platform is because there's no way the math could have at all worked. 5% of military spending, and this is 5% of GDP, so it's not a number. You can grow the economy and make this less a significant spend, is almost a third of all government spending. And there's some of that spending you can't touch. It's transfers to healthcare, it's transfers to people, it's old age security. Yeah. You can't touch this stuff. So the idea that they could cut this much out of the federal government is quite surprising and will be felt if that's the way they're going, or they're just going to add more to the deficit and the debt, and this will be structural deficits that I'm sure Andrew will write lots about. One thing I want to say on the procurement side, yes, there's trouble spending that money. But part of the vision, and I sat down with David McGuinty, the new National Defense Minister this week, is it's about a new economic plan. They want to grow the Canadian defense industry. That's why they're joining ReArm. They want to help Canadian firms negotiate for deals in Europe. They view the economy the way that we're going to get the strongest economy in the G7 as natural resources, as critical minerals, and as the defense industry. And so it's as much about that than it is about responding to the threats of China and Russia in the high Arctic.
Which is exactly my complaint.
Yeah.
I can't,
Go ahead,
I can't
Chantal.
see Andrew, but I'm imagining that he's not smiling.
No, he's not. I can confirm. Now he is, but go ahead, Chantal.
No, it's not the first government that wants to use defense, as Andrew pointed out, as a way to grow the economy.
Sure.
But at some point, I mean, all these goals seem to be on a collision course. And I'm curious to see how it's going to play out. This is just the first act. It's the easy first act. We'll see what happens down the road, because once you get to the end of the fiscal year and a budget in between, there will be things that will need to be done to keep up that 2%, 3.5%. I don't think I think Mark Carney was playing defense with the announcement up to a point when he said, I'm not going to be told by NATO accountants how much I'm going to spend. I don't think we'll ever sign off on 5%.
Well, it's not totally 5%. It's 3.5% of pure defense spending, and then 1.5% of security related. So that could be infrastructure, for example.
AI,
like that's not going to be a problem to get to. It's the 3.5% of ongoing defense spending and making sure that money gets out the door. Because as to Chantal's point, we have had a lot of troubles making sure that happens.
Go ahead, Chantal.
And by the way, unless you assume that Justin Trudeau was a pacifist, there is a reason why they had set a much more distant target for this spending.
Except, again, the Prime Minister seems to be suggesting, Andrew, that Canadians are prepared to do this. And public opinion polling shows that there is an openness to it. I got like 20 seconds.
Yeah, the public opinion has wrapped itself around the idea of 2% of GDP.
Yeah.
When the rubber hits the road of what you're going to give up to spend for that, that's going to be interesting to see whether public opinion holds.
Yeah, you're quite right. That was a good conversation. Thank you. That is it for At Issue on the National. We're going to keep talking, though, and talk about the rumblings of some sort of deal between the U.S. and Canada, maybe ahead of the G7. Catch that on YouTube or the At Issue podcast. Now back to Adrienne. She, of course, is in Toronto.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. We are just keeping an eye again on the breaking news tonight. Israel has launched a series of airstrikes on nuclear targets in Iran. Iran says its top military commander has been killed. And Israel maintains Iran was very close to developing a nuclear weapon. So what the reaction will be, the consequences, all of this is still developing. Stay with us. Breaking tonight, Israel launched a series of airstrikes on nuclear and military facilities in Iran. It is now well past dawn. New details are emerging about the strikes, new thoughts about what may be next. So let's go to Washington now, where Sasha Petrusek is following this story closely. Sasha, both Iran and Israel seem to be bracing for what's coming.
That's right, Adrienne. Both countries have really come to a standstill just hours after these attacks. Of course, in Iran, the standstill is because these attacks are either continuing or there's fear of them continuing. In Israel, the airport is closed and people have been told to stay close to their homes, certainly close to air shelters in case there is retaliation, which Iran has promised to deliver very, very shortly. So it could be in a few hours. It could be a little bit longer than that. We're also getting some details about some of the casualties inside Iran itself, assassinations that Israel has carried out against top generals. 3 of those generals, apparently, Israel says, and Iran is saying that 6 nuclear scientists were killed in all of this. And we are told that these are at the very top level in both cases. So in addition to the many military bases, the nuclear sites and the neighborhoods that were killed, obviously the targets were also individual people that Iran was using, Israel says, to build nuclear bombs and to advance its nuclear program. So at this point, Israel is waiting for what is going to happen next. We're told by Israeli military that they're expecting there could be more than 100 ballistic missiles heading toward Israel at some point. But so far, people are simply waiting. And as I say, both of those countries are pretty much shut down for now. Adrienne?
All right. Thank you, Sasha. That is Sasha Petrusik in Washington. Now, from all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.